Hey, I'm Michael Dorinda,
And I'm Jake Bennett.
and welcome to episode 82 of the North Meets South Meets Web podcast.
North meets South meets Web podcast. I don't think that's right. Is that how it goes? You were going to say
Yeah,
something else.
you gotta gap it. You gotta air gap it. Is it? I don't know. This
Get
is
it, Eric.
episode 82. This is episode 82 of the North Meets South Web podcast. I don't know. I don't even remember what I
There you
just
go.
said. It
You
is
got it.
episode
Hey, you know
82.
what? Yep, it is indeed. It is indeed. And we have a special guest today.
We do indeed. He has
Although
disappeared.
I will say it's going to be a little bit of a weird episode because this particular guest he doesn't actually talk because he's so secretive. So he's just on mute. So he's actually not going to be recorded. He's just going to say whatever he says, and then Michael's going to re-say what he said, and then we'll talk about it.
That's right. We'll
I think
translate
that's how
it.
this works, isn't it?
I think so.
Ninja Parade. Ninja Parade.
Parade.
Does he have a real name?
He does have a real name, but I don't know if we're allowed to say it. So we'll just let
Why don't we?
Ninja Parade introduce themselves.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Yaz. I
Hi,
also
Yaz.
go by Ninja Parade.
Hey, yes.
Excellent.
How's it going, man? Glad to have you on the show. I think is this the second time? I know you might have made a small appearance at one other point in history.
Yeah, I snuck in once, I think, when Michael sent a link to me and almost dared me to join, and I did. And I bombed it, and I came out. And then since then, he's been sending me broken links because I think he regretted that first time where he sent me the right link.
Yeah. It was.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
not good. But hopefully we can have a better go around this time. We've actually got something specific to talk about.
Yeah.
Which is exciting.
We're kind of on like a sprint to the finish right now with like then ping me stuff, right? So
Yeah.
we've got a couple of different items we're working through, Stripe billing being one of those, which has been a joy to work with actually. But the other one that we're kind of working on is Teams. So a little bit of context is we had users, which then owned projects, and we realized actually those projects are going to need to belong to teams, and then users belong to teams, and projects belong to teams. So users sort of implicitly own projects sort of through the teams.
Yeah.
And we've got a couple of different solutions we're talking through with that. But the one I know that Michael, you had kind of suggested originally was having a current team ID on a user. So maybe you can kind of pick it up there and talk about the motivation behind that. And then, Yaz, you can kind of jump in and talk about, you had mentioned on Twitter some potential issues that might cause, and some that you've actually run into in your own SaaS app. So, Michael, maybe you could pick it up there, and then, Yaz, you can just jump in whenever you feel like he's off the rails.
So I'm always off the rails. I'm usually on Laravel, so so the team stuff that we needed to put in was around facilitating then ping me users to be able to have multiple people in a business being able to look at the same account. So this is not really our selling point or anything like that. Users don't cost anything in the grand scheme of things in terms of storage and database records and whatever else. So we wanted to make it as easy as possible to get that in there. And I think a long time ago, I looked through. This was probably my previous job, and I looked at the Spark code base and how it does it, and it basically sets the same kind of thing. It will set the current ID. I don't know if it does it in the session, definitely, but I know that it sets a current ID on the user in the database. So when they switch between teams, it'll switch to that, and that way you can scope everything through that team. So if you, in our instance, if you're wanting to look at the projects for the user, well, the projects are the ones that are on that team that they're currently in. But you can have a user in multiple teams. So I could have my projects in one team. So I'd have then ping me in one team, and then I could invite Jake and I could invite Yaz into that team, and they would be able to see then ping me, but not any of the team's projects from like my work. So I could invite my colleagues, my coworkers to access the projects there, but they wouldn't see then ping me, for example. So that just isolating that kind of stuff. And I mean, I know that there's a lot of talk in the community backwards and forwards, and from every now and then it comes up around multi-tenancy, and everyone's looking for the one true way of doing it. And do you want to have a single database with tenanted IDs in your records? Do you want to have multiple databases? And there's all those different approaches. But I think for us, the simplest case, and certainly the the most simple approach for us is just tenanting the records. So the project belongs to a team. It doesn't really belong to an individual user. Billing would belong to a team. So that would mean that my account could join multiple teams, but I wouldn't be responsible for the billing for all of them. So, work would pay for my work account, and I would pay for my then Ping Me account, and I could join a team of Jake's where, we're looking at his Wilbur stuff. So, being able to isolate that kind of stuff. And then everything else is kind of already scoped. So you can't access a task directly. You have to go through the project. So the task is scoped to the project anyway, and the project is scoped to the user. So the easiest way for us was, as I said, just checking a current team ID on the user. And anytime you switch, so there'd be a drop down, you could jump between teams and it would just update that record in the database. And then everything else would continue to be scoped based on that team. And that was really, as I said, the simplest approach. There's all of these, I guess, mini conniptions that people have about, which is the right way of doing it. I'm like, well, the right way is almost always, in my experience, the way that works best for you. And for us, it was this. And someone had mentioned on Twitter there was a package that Marcel had written, which was Stephen tweeted at us that Marcel had the teamwork package, and I went and had a quick sneaky look at that, and the first thing I saw in there was that it just said it's a current team ID on the user record. So for once in my life, I felt as intelligent as Marcel there. So it was certainly the simplest approach. And Yaz jumped in, and I will let him sort of go into a bit more detail about that. But it was around, if you've got a user that's got two browser terminals, two browser windows open, and you switch teams in one of them, and then weird things can start happening in the other, and if you're sharing logins and things like that. So maybe Yaz, do you want to talk a little bit about the issues that you've seen with the current team ID on the user record?
Yeah. So the first issue that we had was basically having we had a user that was sharing a login with somebody else, and we did have the approach where we were storing the current team that you're viewing on that user record. So the problem that occurred was that the session that one user created where they were using the browser to use, to view team A, the person that was using their login was somewhere else, and they were trying to view team B. And when that person that was viewing team A tried to make any sort of web requests, because it was their session had started viewing one team, and now the database is saying they're trying to view a different team, they ended up everything was getting 403s because they were restricted from being able to see it. And it wasn't a very obvious thing for them. And it was a very hard thing to kind of realize after the fact how to solve. And then the thing that we did to solve that was because, like Laravel models can be serialized down to JSON. Mm-hmm. What the approach that we decided to take was to save the database query for, like if you have a team ID or an account ID or whatever it is that you're using, storing that as a session, you're going to have to do a database query to pull it out and work with it from there. And most of the time, you're just using it to scope your other queries. So what we actually did was we stored the actual entity, the actual model to JSON in the session. We were using a Redis driver. And then we had a middleware that would basically pull that data out. And there is a from JSON method in Eloquent that you can pass the JSON. So you can create a new model, and then you can use the from JSON method, pass the JSON, decode it back to an array, and then pass it to that method, and then that would basically create a new instance of that model. So we were able to hydrate basically back and forth with that situation. And the nice thing about the session is that it didn't really matter if people were sharing the login, because everyone would have their own version of that session. So you would never end up with a stale browser session for somebody doing that.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. I mean, once you said that, because initially what you had said was, what if you have a user with a browser window open to one team and then another one open to another team? And I was thinking, well, it's the same user, it'll not a problem. It's a shared session. But what you're talking about is two separate users, two separate sessions. Mm-hmm. That's not going to give you the same situation. Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And I can see how that would have been a nightmare to debug. I can't even imagine. Yeah. I'm curious how you even figured that out.
We just got a screenshot, and she said it was getting everything with a 403, and I said, well, can you refresh? And when she refreshed, the team name changed at the top of the browser in the screenshot, and that was the indication, because everything that we showed in that screen was based on the team that you were currently looking at.
Right.
So it did take like a visual screenshot for us to figure that out. Just getting a 403 meant that she was basically like, we were trying to figure out if we had like some Sierra query problem that on the guard that was failing somewhere, but ended up just being that. We did find it alleviated a lot of the problems when we did go to like just having that serialized model in the session. Just be able to pull that out and kind of go from there. It was really good. Made it easy.
So, yeah. So do you store any sort of like last viewed team or anything like that, like on the user? So like if they're first logging in, you know what model to serialize, or if they have multiple teams, do they always have to select which team they want to view as soon as they log in?
So the way that we did it was, if there wasn't, it was always a session. So what we did was we left it as a cookie. This was a single page app at the time, so it was like a JavaScript cookie. So it wasn't like going to expire with your session. But what we ended up doing afterwards was we would just allow them to pick an account, because it was just like a regular web session. And they're just going to go from there. And if they only had one team, we would just automatically just kind of set it to that team. But yeah, it did solve the problem. So what we did was we actually had the team ID or the account ID, and then you had another session value that was actually the model, so that you can kind of interchange the two of them. And that's how we did it. And then if they have like 5 teams, what you can do is show them everything but the team they're on right now, so that when you're selecting, you're not going to like show them the team that they were already viewing. So it just made it a lot easier for a lot of those use cases.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I have to keep that in mind when you're doing team switching, that you don't see the current one. Yeah, it's interesting to see how we'll go with that.
Yeah, I was gonna say we're not doing an SPA either, so I'm not sure if that's gonna make a difference. Maybe slightly, because instead of having to ask somebody to refresh, like we're doing a refresh on every page pretty much, right? So so it might be a little bit more obvious why it's 403ing.
It'd be problematic if there's a shared login, because we're using Livewire and because we're polling. We'll poll every 5 seconds. If you were sharing a login, if I was sharing a login with you, and you were to change the team, then my stuff would probably start breaking pretty, within 5 seconds or so when the first Livewire poll goes out. So it's something to definitely keep in mind, and being able to isolate it to the browser session as opposed to the user is one way was probably the best way of tackling that issue.
I was going to say, like with ours, Michael, right now, the way that I had coded it is I had a method on the user called getCurrentTeam, which would just look at that record, the user record. It would look at the current team column, and then it would just fetch that team from the database, right? And then we would kind of go from there. But I know the way that you've looked at doing it was to, instead of getCurrentTeam, to just have a method current team.
Yeah, I just
which was the relationship. Right, exactly. So if you wanted to do something like what Yaz is talking about, it sounds like it would be more similar to kind of the way that I had built it. Whereas like if that was the situation that we were going with, it'd be pretty simple, because getCurrentTeam would just return a serialized, it would just return the model straight from, it'd be a hydrated model from the session sort of deal. But I don't know how heavily you're utilizing that relationship. I haven't even had a chance to look at your version of the code. Everywhere. Yeah.
Because you had stumbled over the fact that we had to change so many things by introducing the teams and pushing everything down another level.
Correct. Because
because it meant we had to go and inject the current team method, the accessor in there and things like that. Whereas using the relationship meant that I could just always rely on the current team helping me to scope that. Except in one scenario, I probably need to write a blog post about that. It bit me for way too long last night.
Yeah, so talk about that. What was that situation where it was? I think I'm aware of what it is, but you go ahead and explain it.
So the issue that I came across is that with that current team, so we would have the current team relationship, which would just look at the current team ID on the user, on the request user, the authenticated user, and then it would go and find the team. and then we would access the relationships off of that. So go, in your UI, you would go $user, arrow, current team, arrow, projects. Now, the law of Demeter says, not that I'm one for laws, but the law of Demeter is one that I usually stick to, is that you can touch your friends and you can touch your privates, but you can't touch your friends' privates. So essentially that from the user, you should not reach through the team to get the projects. So what I was doing is, instead of going user, current team, projects, I was adding a relationship to the user model called projects, which would encapsulate that belongs to. So instead of me in my controllers going user, current team, projects, I would just go user, projects, and then the relationship method itself would delegate through. The problem with that is that Laravel doesn't let you do that. and I was looking at it and looking at it different ways, and I was calling, this arrow projects as a method, arrow, this current team as a method, projects, and that didn't work. That caused issues, and it wasn't until I started putting my professional developer hat on and DDing everywhere throughout the code base that I realized that when it was running the queries, it was not running the query that I had expected through that relationship. If I called that directly in the controller, like if I was user, arrow, current team, arrow, projects, it did, but through the relationship itself, there's some magic, I would imagine, under the hood that meant that it was actually not doing that. It was loading the team, and then it was just loading the project, and it was because of that, it was joining on the team ID. It was joining on the user ID rather than the team ID, so it was loading the wrong projects, which of course is a security concern, because instead of loading the current team ID 2's projects, it was loading the current user 1 ID's projects, which meant that it was getting team ID 1's projects for user that was not in that team. So it took me a little while to come across that solution, and I waited until Jonathan Renick was awake, and I said, Jonathan, am I dumb, or is this something that you just can't do? And he said, I have never done that. And I said, that's a good indication that I shouldn't be doing this.
Right.
And then, I mean, if he hasn't done it, then nobody should do it, basically, in my opinion. But I went back through his Eloquent Performance Patterns course, and in a situation similar to that, he had it like basically a with a scope. So instead of doing that reach through, I had a with team project scope, which just loaded the current team projects. So inside that scope with team projects method, I just did a query with current team dot projects, and it did what it was supposed to do. And so I just went and littered that through the code base wherever we needed to get the current team projects, and everything, surprisingly, all the tests just started turning green again. So I was very thankful for that. I was very thankful for...
Was there also an issue with like the fact that there was a column called current team and you also had a relationship called current team, and it was trying to figure out which one you were trying to do, right? So what we ended up having to do was change the current team column to be current team ID, so that there wasn't conflicting stuff between when Laravel calls current team and when it's trying, when it's trying to figure out whether you're talking about the relationship or whether they're talking about the column or which one, right?
Yeah, because I didn't want to ever be in a situation where I had to remember to eager load the current team. I just added in the protected with property the current team relationship, so that I know that the user would always load the current team. But because we just had current team as current underscore team in the user model, and then the relationship method was current team, doing that, Laravel would then cast the current team to current underscore team and then override the integer.
Right.
So when you are doing things like this, make sure that you suffix your relationship columns as
with ID,
current underscore team underscore ID. Or don't make the relationship match the column name. Otherwise, you're going to lose access to the column, and all kinds of crazy things will happen. So there's a bit of a PSA for you on that front. All of this pain and suffering, don't do those two things. Don't encapsulate relationship, belongs to relationships through your models like that. What I did find was that you can reference them through the the model itself, but don't encapsulate relationships inside relationships. So you could add on where clauses and things like that if you're gonna have, for example, I've got a Teams relationship on the user, and I've got a owned Teams relationship, and the owned Teams relationship simply returns this Teams where owner ID equals this ID, right? And that's fine. You can do that, but don't have a relationship that is just chaining relationships. That doesn't work. That was a bad time that lasted a couple of hours, and it was getting deep into the night, and we talked about this on Twitter. It's getting to midnight, and it's like, it's an easy fix. Just 5 more minutes, and I'll get it sorted. And yeah, it's sleepy brain. The sleepy brain's need to fix something is often stronger than the sleepy brain's need for sleep.
Yeah, true story. True story. I'm trying to think about if there's a way to mitigate the situation that Yaz was describing without having to throw something into the session. And here's why I think, for me, in testing and just in general, and I have this same problem in an app that we are dealing with at work. It's not at all similar to saying this current team problem, but it's just that we have this data that gets loaded in from this API that we just throw into the session. And it's more difficult, it feels like to me, to test. At the very least, it's a pain in the butt to test because, I have to chuck something into the session instead of just using a factory to set the current team ID and then I'm done, right? So, Yaz, have you found anything like as far as your testing story goes that has made that easier for you to with the session stuff? I never really like having to test session stuff in my tests.
Yeah.
I do it because I have to sometimes, but did you find any tips or tricks when you were dealing with that, or find any ways around that?
What we have is basically we just have a bunch of test helpers. So what I did was I basically made like a one method call, I think it was like set account or something like that. And all it would do is it would use the factory to create an account, and then it would take the account ID and store it in the session and put the model in the session for me. Mm-hmm. And that was just something that I had that we just called in the setup of the base class for the PHP unit. So it wasn't very difficult to kind of have it set everywhere. The nice thing about that was when we did end up having to make a change, I honestly forgot what the change was from one version of Laravel to another, where we had to change something with that, the way that we approached it. It was literally just changed in one place and all the tests worked from there. So I never really felt that pain. It always just kind of made it just easier to not couple the two things with the database in that situation, because it isn't something that I felt like needed to be in the database because is a user generated thing. But I could see both sides of it, right? Like it's definitely a lot easier just to generate a team using a factory and just kind of go from there. But using the session in a test is not difficult at all. I never had that problem.
Yeah, it's also like if I'm testing locally or something like that, and maybe I want to gain access to a team that, this is maybe a different situation too. Maybe there's some security stuff around this as well. But let's say, for instance, I don't have a UI built or something like that, or just some exceptional circumstance where I want to switch my current user to a particular team. With that, like right now, I could just kind of swap it out in the database and then refresh the page and I'm on that team, right? Whereas like in a situation like yours, I would have to have some sort of method or some secret page maybe to kind of go to and say, assign me to this team, almost like an imitate method or something that would grab that thing out of the database, push it into the session, and then send me back to the other page. I can see workarounds for all of it, but I think for me, when Michael said, because I was going down the path of, I'll just put it in the session, and when he was like, just put it on the database record, I was like, oh, thank God, that feels so much better to me. I prefer to have it in the database if possible, but with that being said, like the problem you brought up is a real problem, right? People do that, but I feel like people do that more often if there isn't the ability to create multiple users, or if they're restricted to not being able to create multiple users. But that is a thing. Like in our app, like in our like lowest tier, you get one team member, and so I can very easily see somebody saying, "Well, I mean, I don't need really, I'll just share my login with somebody else." So I don't know. I mean, it's possible. It could happen. It could happen. But
the one thing that I do kind of like keep in the back of my mind is I'm not sure when it was or where it was, but I remember somebody asked Taylor if he had any advice about building something. I think it may have been on his little podcast when he was talking about making the $17.2 billion that he's made. But he basically said always, like, even if you don't need it, make an account, make an entity above your user, because it's going to be easier for you.
That is very true.
I kind of, in Contest Kit, for example, not only do I have accounts, I actually have organizations that are even above that, and it's made my life easy because I can do whatever I want with that. It just makes it easier to grow without having to make a magnitude of changes.
Yeah.
But in terms of this particular thing, you're going to have people using more than one person using the same login. Like, it will happen. It's not something you can control. Putting something in the session, if you really need to refresh or reset that, logging out clears that, because it is related to that. And the session is also like a very secure thing, just like your database. Like, no one's going to be able to kind of write to that. So I never really felt any of that pain. I feel like sometimes, like in the development world, I may have like a higher pain tolerance for some stuff, but
yeah,
maybe I haven't felt pain somebody else would feel like really fast. But I honestly, I've not had any problems with it. I've used it on my app personally. Like, I know we use it at Spur. We use it on our customer facing side, and we haven't really had any problems. It is a pain in the butt, though, I will admit, like whenever like the security patch that happened that basically invalidated all the cookies, like stuff like that then you end up feeling that pain for your customers. But that the biggest pain has been having to have them log back in, and kind of like not be like still logged in.
Yeah, as opposed to like getting 403s and random errors when they're trying to do stuff because the team's changed. And it's a balancing act as well. I think if someone's, you say you can't stop people from sharing logins, and I totally agree. And I've got no issues with people doing that. But at the same time, how much support, you don't want your app to be broken, but how much support do you give people that are sort of flaunting the system that you put in place around that kind of stuff? Now, obviously, you don't want to just flat out start throwing, default error pages, but you want to handle it in some way when it does happen. And if that means, forcing a refresh into the browser, you can push a value every time we load the page that like this is the current ID, and if the logged in user's current ID mismatches with the live, like the fresh current ID, just force the page to refresh, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, kind of like, isn't that kind of how Jonathan handles inertia? Where
in inertia,
the assets recompile. I think it's like a 429 or something, and then it just forces a refresh.
Yeah,
you can definitely do that. That's definitely a graceful way of doing it. But then you have to add that complexity into your app. So I guess no matter what you do, you're always going to be introducing one side of complexity on one side or the other. And for me, it just, having it as a session driven thing that the user sets always just made the most sense. But I do know that there's also a lot of value in just keeping it as simple as possible. But at some point, hopefully that your app does grow, and you will have to change something to kind of handle a bigger use case. And it's kind of bulletproof for that size too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I almost feel like you could do, like, if you really cared to. We're not really using Pusher for anything right now. Well, are we? Yeah, we might be for one thing. No?
No. Everything's
using WebSockets for anything?
Everything's Livewire.
Oh, that's right. That is right. Yep. I was going to say, if you did, what you could do is you could like dispatch an event that broadcasts when you switch teams, right? And then, like you said, kind of just listen for that Pusher event on the front end. And if it changed, you could either, alert them on the page, just drop a little toaster notification in there, like, it appears as though someone using your team or your account has switched teams. Sign out now or like refresh your page or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one thing I am curious about, I think this is something that Taylor teased about. Isn't he bringing in something with like user sessions, multiple user sessions or something like that? Do you remember that screenshot?
I know that he's been talking about it. Not recently. I think he's worked it out. It may even be in. No, it must be coming in Laravel 8. The ability to have, multiple session logouts and things like that, so users can log in multiple devices. But that would.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
sure,
that would
makes
allow
sense.
Jake and I to log in with the same credentials on 2 different devices, but we would still be tied. Like we'd be bound by the source of truth that is the database in our scenario currently. So, putting it in a session would certainly allow those scenarios to happen for sure.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So do you mean that multiple people, like, I think, I'm just going to say it out loud so you can confirm if this was what you're saying or not. Do you mean that the session then is stored in like, in Redis or in the database or whatever, and then any person who's accessing that user's account, they're all using that centralized session and the cookie is just basically pulling that in from the database first. So if you're on your phone or if you're on your computer or if you're on your whatever, you don't really have separate sessions. They're actually the same session. And so when you log out on one, you log out on all. Is that what you're saying? Or like if you update the current team in one, you update the current team in all. Like if you're on your phone and you switch teams, the next time you're on your computer, it's also going to switch teams, even if you're logged in 2 different devices. Is that what you mean or no?
I think it's more about tracking where the sessions are. So currently when you're logged in, you just logged in and it's assumed that like you are logged in. Whereas the stuff that I saw Taylor tweeting about and teasing was that you could see a session that was on your phone as discrete from a session that was on your MacBook that is on your iPad. And that would appear as 3 different sessions. And you could, I think the problem that the challenge he was trying to overcome was how to log out a specific one of those without logging out all of them. So you could say like log everything out except for my session on my MacBook, but log my iPad and my iPhone out and things like that. So that, it would track discrete device sessions as opposed to a user session. I don't think there's no way of tracking them is what I'm saying. If I log in on my iPad and my and on my MacBook, logging out of one doesn't log me out of both. I'm pretty sure. But you can't distinguish them from the application side. Like there's no way of knowing on my iPad. Like I can't see on my iPad that there is a session logged in on my MacBook. And I think that's the kind of stuff that Taylor was
kind of like how like in Google, it's like it'll tell you like log out all accounts, right?
Yeah.
You can just go in and it says like log everything out.
Yeah, Netflix has probably one of the most sophisticated ones that I've seen where you can just kick off one particular device off that session. It would be database driven, I would imagine, and that would be a good candidate. I was thinking if it does work out, if it does come out planned the way that the way that I think it would, that you'd be able to add your database record for the current team to that session database record, and then you can have it where you need it, where you would like it at least.
Yeah. And if that does happen, then we can do that in Laravel 8 when it comes out in 2 weeks. We upgrade the whole app and rewrite, hopefully delete large chunks of stuff. This is usually what happens when new versions of Laravel come out. Features
so did we just add 3 months to the official release of Then Ping Me?
Yeah, I
think that's correct.
We might have to push it out to October.
Yeah, next October probably is what we're looking at.
We originally said October, but we never said which year.
Yeah. But get early access.
It's not October right now in Australia?
No, it's November.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it'd be 2021 October.
All right.
Yeah, year ahead. It's kind of like Lost. They're just kind of this little hidden island in the middle of the sea that nobody really can get to. But there's like a time in the future. Yeah, that is true. Do you guys want to talk at all about Stripe billing? It's been pretty cool.
Stripe checkout,
looking at some of that stuff.
Tell us about it.
Because, it's billing and checkout, right? So there's 2 different things, right? So
yeah, you got confused by one. You thought you were going to have to build a whole billing platform when you realized you were looking at the wrong thing.
Exactly. Well, so I was looking at. I started at the top, and it was like overview, customers, products, and prices, which I've gone through all of that before because I was using this for something else. Because I was just using checkout for another situation I was dealing with. And then it was like, and then like a little bit further down on the docs, it says start with a use case, fixed price subscriptions with Elements. I'm like, that's what I'm looking for, fixed price subscriptions. Let's do that. Click, look in that. And I'm like going down the list. I'm like, what the heck? Like, this doesn't say anything about this portal that I've seen. Like, what am I missing? I'm like, geez, I must have misread this. I was like, this is so disappointing. We're going to have to build this whole thing anyway. And then I realized it says fixed price subscriptions with Elements. Well, we're not using Elements. We're using Checkout, right? And so that's kind of the difference. So they have this customer portal that you can configure, and it still uses customers and products and prices. But it manages the whole process of subscribing somebody to a plan, as well as allowing them to cancel a plan or see any of their payments, or upgrade to a new subscription, or downgrade to a different subscription, and prorating them, and all of that stuff, and handling all of that for you. And so the way that it works is pretty slick. And they have some pretty great API tools to allow you to do it straight from your machine without ever having to get into the Stripe dashboard. But I've found that really just going into the Stripe dashboard is a pretty dang easy way to do it. So if you go in, you'll have along the left-hand side, you'll have products, and you'll want to define a different product for each one of your tiers. So we'll have like our solo plan, our pro plan, and then our business plan, or whatever. So you'll define 3 of those, and then with each one of those, you'll also define a price that goes along with them. And the pricing is pretty easy to set up. You just say the amount of dollars, and then what currency it's in, if it's in Australian dollars or US dollars or whatever, right? What do you guys call them? Loons? No, that's Canadian, right?
Pesos.
Yes.
What did you guys say? Oh, what are they?
The Canadian snow pesos, American freedom dollars, and we've got the Australian dollaritos.
Yeah, dollar dues. Yeah. So you define the currency, and then you define how much it is, and then it'll have a schedule, right? So you can say monthly. So once you have your products and your pricing set up, then all you have to do is create a customer portal. So in your customer portal, you can have all the branding that you want. So you can select brand colors, you can select an icon, you can select a logo, and then you choose from any of the products that you've defined which ones you want to be available in this particular customer portal. So then all you have to do is for each entity in your app that you will want to attach the billing to, which in our app is Teams, you have to create a customer for them in Stripe. So that's the only thing that you really need to use like the Stripe PHP library for, is to create a customer for that particular entity. So for us, we just, as soon as they log in and register, they create that team, and at that time we'll actually create the customer for them in Stripe as well, and save that Stripe customer ID onto that team record. And then literally all you have to do to get them over to that page where they can select which subscription they want and get checked out and everything is you have to have their customer ID, and then you redirect them over to the page. That's it. And then they can handle all of it over there. So all of that stuff is managed for you. You don't have to touch any of it. And then the rest of it just comes through with webhooks. So you have customer.invoice.updated, or not invoice, customer.subscription.updated or canceled or paid or whatever it might be. Failure to pay. So like if their time comes due for that payment and it fails to get paid, right, they'll webhook back to you, and you just reference your Stripe customer ID, and then you can do whatever you need to do. Yeah. So really, really slick. And you had said the other day in one of our chats, you're like, I'm so glad we waited this long to do billing because it's all done for us now.
Yeah, I'm so glad we just kept punting it down the road until Stripe just built it all for us.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, because literally it was like a month ago?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a little bit more than that,
recent,
but like
a couple of months.
Very recent. Yeah, very recent. And so it's like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So, and all the branding stuff is done now. All of our products are built in. It's all in testing mode right now. So the last thing I have to do is the webhook portion of it, which Spatie has a package for. So we're using the Spatie webhook client package. They do.
I know it's hard to believe that Spatie has a package for this specific use case.
And it's so funny because I fell into the trap that Michael always makes fun of me for, which is like, okay, well, we already have webhook clients, like Spatie's webhook client package. I'm just going to like write my own validator for the Stripe, payload that's coming through to make sure that it's actually legit from Stripe. And I'm like going through it. And then I was like, I'm just going to Google this real quick. And sure enough, Spatie Stripe webhooks. And it uses the webhook client package under the hood and Stripe.php. It handles all of that crap. Yeah. I'm like, well, there we go. There we go.
Package inception.
I know. It seriously is. That's exactly what it was. So somebody used that instead. So pretty cool. Yeah, I'm excited to kind of get that wrapped up here. It seems like I'm so close, but I know I'm going to get in there and be like, oh wait, there's a lot of stuff I didn't consider yet. So
Yeah.
anyway,
how are you handling? I don't know if you've talked about this in the past, but how are you handling like the your side of it once the the Stripe portal's taking care of stuff? Are you guys using like Cashier or anything like that, or are you just making sure that someone's got a trial and or subscription and like kind of going from there?
Yeah, we're probably just going to do as little as possible by ourselves, really.
Yeah, I don't really know that we actually need to use Cashier because I believe Cashier kind of manages a lot of the complexity that Stripe is handling now.
Mm-hmm.
So like generating
like when the webhook comes in, you guys are like storing invoices and like the subscription has been created, updated, all that stuff, or
yeah, we don't have to store the invoice because that's all stored on Stripe's side.
Mm-hmm.
So if they ever need to, so basically as soon as they click billing, I redirect them to Stripe. That's it.
Okay.
Like that's all that we have to do. And then they can see all their invoices there. They can see what plan they're a part of. They can upgrade or downgrade or cancel. They can do everything straight from Stripe. And I don't have to do any of that. So all I have to care about is once they make a change or once they pay for a subscription, I just have to basically subscribe them to that plan on my side and then, check policies to make sure that they can do what they need to do. Right.
So it's a very minimal thing. It's just like a subscription table and
yeah.
Like
exactly right. Yeah. So you have like a plan. Yeah, a plan table and a subscription table, so that it's a join between the team and the plan.
Yeah, it's definitely nice to get us up and running very quickly in terms of onboarding new subscribers and handling plan changes and pro rata and things like that. In the future, we probably look at more tightly integrating it. Allowing people to grab their own invoices from our side and things like that. Maybe, but
I don't really know what the difference is, to be real honest. Like I don't like. To me, like if you click billing, I would expect to see exactly what I'm going to see when I go over to Stripe. Like, I don't really know what the advantage is of building it yourself. I would say, like, unless we run into a problem where it's necessary to build that stuff again, like locally, I don't really see any value in it. Like, it's all boilerplate anyway. Like,
it's just,
if it's already branded to our stuff on Stripe's side, I wouldn't care to build it again.
It's got,
and I'm fairly confident that
like a Stripe thing. Whereas, if it's on our site, it looks like our site. It's got our styles and branding. It's not a huge thing, and I think most developers would be okay with it. But if you've got if it gets bigger and you've got like a billing entity, you're at a big business and someone's responsible for paying it, and they log in and they click billing, and then it takes them to another page. They may be less. They'll be like, well, where have I been redirected? What's going on here, kind of thing. So yeah, it's
the other nice piece of it. I was gonna say the other nice piece of it too is like Stripe billing also provides a complete back office solution as well. So it's, for our side of it, like if we wanted to have somebody who just managed refunds and billing and all that stuff, we don't have to build any UI for that. Yeah. You can just invite a person who just handles billing, subscriptions, all that stuff for our Stripe account, and they can just handle all of that for you. So it's very, it's full featured. Obviously, they didn't leave anything out. So you can see all of that on their stripe.com/billing page where they talk about all of that stuff. But it's pretty amazing. So anyway, like you said, one thing I did to show like the invoice in my UI was the invoice created or invoice paid webhook actually gives you a URL to the PDF that you can get anyways. Oh, nice.
So it's a good thing it's a good thing to store.
Yeah, which I'm pretty sure Spark does as well. Same kind of thing.
Yeah, they generate one too, though, don't they? I think they do.
Yeah, actually,
maybe they do both.
They'll generate it, and then but it's based on the webhook coming in or the subscription, charging. So yeah, it's something that, it's definitely something we won't need to worry about, especially because we left it so late down the road to implement it. That the fact that it exists within Stripe entirely, and we can just concentrate on our app, which is obviously what they were aiming for with this product. Is we can spend a bit more time working on teams and not worry so much about the billing.
Yep, I'm pretty excited about it. So yeah, that's what I'm working on right now. I started some of the team stuff, and Michael took the torch with that and is working on that. I was going to send over to you, Michael. Dries had created the repo with all these Blade.
The Blade UI kit.
Yeah, it wasn't the Blade UI kit. It was think it was something else, and I think it was like with the tall stack. That's what it was. It was the tall
Oh,
stack.
the
It was like
tall,
this
awesome tall thing.
awesome tall stack stuff. Yeah, exactly. And like it was the first link in, and it was like, here's a Alpine component, I think yeah, I don't know if it's Alpine and Livewire. I think it is Alpine and Livewire component that does team invites. And it's just like, email, add an email, like add invite, and you just and then it sends it to your backend for you.
Nice.
So it's pretty sweet. I think that's a good one to have
Yeah, sounds good to me.
for what we're needing to do. Yeah. Yeah. Hey, so we're at 45 minutes. Yaz, how much time do you have?
I'm easy.
Okay. I got one more thing we could talk about real quick if we want.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so because Yaz, I'm sure you already have experience with this. So with each plan that somebody's on, you obviously have like some ceilings on certain features, right? So you can have this many team members, you can have this many projects, you can have this many, whatever it might be, right? So the question is, where do you store how many they have remaining of a certain thing, right? So let's just keep it real simple. Let's talk about team invites. So with the plan, you get, let's say 3 team members. Where do you keep track of how many team members they've used? Or do you literally just always reference the relationship in order to determine how many they have left and if they can add another one, or if they have run out, or whatever? Does that make sense, the question?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So like what's been your experience with that? How do you guys kind of do that on your side?
For me, I do use a relationship for the number of a certain item that they're allowed to have. Where I set the limits, I usually have like a Stripe plan config that has like an array accessor that's same as the Stripe slug for the project, or the plan. And on there, I outline what like the max limit of certain things are. So like, if you're allowed, 5 team members and 10 projects, that's where I put the limits on there. And then from there, I just kind of use the relationships of the number of teammates that they have and the number of projects they have, and kind of whether or not they're above or equal to the maxes in the config. And that just seemed to be like the easiest way to do it, because you can just cache that config and make it quick.
Yep.
Yeah, what I'm curious about is, so like if I'm on the team member page, right? So this is, and it's not necessarily right or wrong. It's more like a convenience thing for me. The way that I would typically do it, because I'm terrified of ever like these magic numbers floating around in my database or whatever, I'm always afraid that I'm going to forget to update one, and it's just going to be, it's going to be wrong, or it's going to be out of date or something. But it's really convenient to have just an integer straight on a database table instead of having to go look up a number of relationships. So for example, a team member, right? So if I have a team, and then I have how many team members are currently invited or have accepted or whatever, I could go do the query to go look those up, or I could just, when somebody accepts, or when there's a currently active team member that comes in and accepts whatever, I can just look at the number of users available, like on that team or something, and decrease it by 1. Right, like I set it when they subscribe to be like 3, and then if somebody accepts, you could just set it to 2. Right, and again, the reason why that's dangerous is because if something changes, for example, they update their subscription, now you've got some sort of weird calculations to handle around the updating of that table column. It is certainly more convenient, but it's a little bit less. It doesn't feel as certain, right? There's a lot of uncertainty around. Is this number actually right, or is this just kind of like what my best guess was based on the information I had?
My gut tells me that you're going to want this to be a dynamically checked thing, but
I agree with you. I totally agree with you. My very pragmatic side of my brain is like, oh, but it would be so nice if I could put it in a database column and make that work somehow to be always updated, so I didn't ever have to reference the relationship. But
because if you ever change the outer limits of anything,
sorry, yeah, it's easy enough to just do like user team members count, and it's like a really quick query just to get that. It's not like there's going to be it's not an inefficient query. You're just doing a count on an index column. So you can see how many active users are in there, and you can compare it against the configuration for that team plan as well. So yeah,
it's gonna be like user, current team member count, something like that.
Yeah.
Right?
Otherwise, you need to, you need to cache it. If, as you say, if they change plans, you need to dynamically change that. If they're changing down in plans and they've got, 5 users, but the new plan only allows them to have 3, like, how do you deal with that? Do you stop them from changing? I mean, we can't stop them from changing plan because they're changing plan on Stripe.
Right.
So you've got no way of doing that dynamically. So what happens in those scenarios?
That is a good question. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I think that what you might honestly do, I was actually thinking about this today. Yes, I'd be interested to hear how you guys do that. What I was thinking about today is if they did that, to give like a grace period of sorts, to say, looks like you recently updated your plan. Your current usage of the product exceeds the limitations imposed by your new subscription. You'll have by this date to, update your plan to be within limits, or you'll basically lose access to those particular pieces, right? So give them like a grace period. Say like the most 2 recent. So like if you went from a plan that had 5 teammates and the current plan you're on only has 3, it'd be like the most recent 2 to accept would lose access, right?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, you have to be careful about making that kind of assumption because the most recent 2, it could be like someone comes in to your business and is there to replace you. So removing them as you leave is probably not a good idea if there's some overlap there. I wonder if there's some way, like if there's some webhook that Stripe sends us to say like, can the user change to this plan? And then we would do the check then and we could reject it. I don't really think webhooks work that way. But it'd be good to know if there's some way of dynamically making the plans available within Stripe checkout.
You can, you can make it so that they can't change subscriptions. You can basically just disallow it from the portal, but that seems pretty limiting.
You could disallow like downgrades maybe only if they want to go from a higher tier to a lower tier. They'd have to send a support request or whatever, and we could do it for them. And things like that. So it's something that we need to think about. Definitely something we need to investigate and have an answer for, at least in the back of our minds. Hopefully no one's going to be upgrading and then downgrading plans in the short term.
Right.
Because we have to do the same thing. Like if you're on a single player plan that only gives you 1 project, and then you move to a 3 project plan and then move down again. It's not just the team members, but it's also the projects. Like
projects, exactly.
You can't move from 3 projects to 1 project without something happening.
I think what you're saying or what you said earlier was probably correct, and this might be how you're handling it. You might look at their stuff and say you can't downgrade because you are using the app in a way that makes it so you can't. So you need to get rid of these things before you downgrade, and then you can downgrade, right? So we can't allow you to you can cancel altogether, and that's fine. But you can't downgrade unless you get rid of some of your stuff, because you have to before we'll allow you to do that, right?
Yeah, I'm just reading the docs here. I don't see anything about how you would be able to handle this, but that does introduce quite a tricky scenario where someone's over their limit and they go into this portal, they downgrade. You got a webhook that they've downgraded, and then they're like sitting at everything is over the max of what the new plan that they're on is, and how you handle that.
Right.
That is a tough little edge case.
Yeah.
And it's going to happen. That's the thing. It's not even really an edge case. I mean, it's definitely going to happen.
Yeah. Maybe we could hit the Stripe people and be like, hey, how do you suppose we handle this scenario? Because we wouldn't be the only ones, I would imagine.
I've got a contact over there, actually. We're looking at switching our entire payment provider over to Stripe. And so there's a dude, George. He's a solution specialist. He's a pretty freaking smart dude.
We might have a special solution just for you.
Yep. Who knows? Well, everybody, I think that's what we got for today. Anything else we want to talk about before we go?
I think that was a solid episode. I think we got some good suggestions on how we can save ourselves some future pain. or at least
Yeah,
keep things in, things to keep in mind if that pain comes our way, depending on how constrained we are for time.
for sure. For sure. Yes, thanks for taking some time out for us, man. Appreciate it. It was good to have some of your expertise with this stuff. This is obviously our first SaaS app, so we don't, we're fresh in this game. I think you've
Say
been
it.
doing this
We
for
have
a
no idea
while.
what we're doing.
That's correct. That's correct.
I do want to just say that I originally thought I was just going to be showing Michael something on Tuple. Then I sat down and then I saw that it was the North Meets Southwest podcast.
Originally, that's
So
what it was going to be, but you were late, and then everything sort of
yeah,
cascaded into. So I think this was a good conversation. I think some people will get some good advice out of it. I'm glad I was finally able to get you a link that didn't work. It's weird that you've just been getting bad links all this time.
yeah, it's been bad. It's been really weird. That one that never going to give you up video that you sent me. I don't know why that happened, but it's a good song.
Awesome.
I like it.
Yeah,
It is. It is.
One
Hey,
of the
Yaz,
mysteries of the
before we
internet.
let you go, is there
Yeah.
anything you'd like to promo? Any sites you'd like to send people? How can people follow you? All that good stuff.
I'm just Ninja Parade everywhere. NinjaParade.ca because I'm Canadian and someone's squatting the .com. Yeah, but Ninja Parade on Twitter. I do troll a lot, so don't take anything I say seriously, please.
One of our
yeah.
favorite community members.
Yeah, my claim to fame is that Jeffrey Way in the second New York Laracon, I was
Yeah.
standing at the desk there. Remember, it was like you walk downstairs
I do
to that
remember,
theater,
yeah.
and there was a desk.
Yep.
I was standing there doing something with my camera, and Jeffrey Way walked down, 2 minutes before his talk, and he said, "Yaz, funniest guy on Twitter," and then went into this auditorium, and I basically have been holding on to that for years.
You went and
That's
wept in a
amazing.
corner. You're like, all my hard
Yeah.
work has finally been
He
recognized.
knows
Yeah.
my name.
I could
He
tell
knows
you-
my name.
I could tell you one other funny Jeffrey Way story that we can
Let's
edit
hear it. I
out.
want to hear it.
So
we're live,
the
so just be mindful of that. We are on YouTube.
Okay, well, it's not bad. I'm just saying, like,
Okay.
it doesn't
Okay.
need to be included. So the first Laracon that I attended was the first Louisville one in Kentucky.
Yep.
And you remember the auditorium there? Like there was as soon as you come out, there was a bar. So on the first night, there was like the drinks were happening, and my buddy that I went there with, he wasn't a drinker, so we'd both get in line, and then we'd get to the front of the line to get a drink, and he'd get me a second beer, which after about 40 minutes was a bad idea. So anyways, I go to the bathroom, which was, as you remember, to the left of the auditorium there, and I go in. And as I go in there, I see Jeffrey Way at the bathroom at the urinal. And me being really shy normally, with a couple of drinks in me, I just tend to be a little bit louder than I should be and a lot more confident. I went up to Jeffrey Way and Jeffrey! And you know how much Jeffrey likes strangers, especially in a situation where he's urinating. So yeah, he just basically just turned around and just left as fast as he could.
Yeah.
It was really funny.
That's
You
hilarious.
snuck up on him like the ninja you are.
Yeah.
No, I was
didn't
actually
even see
urinating, and he was coming in to urinate, and I
Oh,
basically
gotcha.
and then he stopped in his tracks
Hey,
and was like,
Jeffrey.
and you can see in his face, nope.
No,
And he
I don't
probably
need
went
to
up
go
to the
that bad.
third floor bathroom. Yeah, yeah. I can
You're
hold
like,
it for another
dude,
hour.
Come pee next to me. Pee next to me. We're
Yeah, over
cool.
here, buddy. Over here. Yeah.
I got a spot saved for you.
Yeah.
Oh, my word.
Amazing.
That's
I'm
hilarious.
such an idiot. Such an idiot.
Oh, that's why we love you.
We love you
That's
so
why we
much.
love you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you
Awesome.
for having me.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for coming on, man. This was episode 82. If you'd like to find show notes for this episode, you can find them at northmeetsouth.audio/82. Hit us up on Twitter at NorthSouthAudio, at Jacob Bennett, and Michael Dorinda. If you have anything to say or have questions or would like to harass us, and of course, if you like the show, rate it up in your podcatcher of choice. 5 stars would be very appreciated, and a retweet while you're at it would be great. All right, folks. We will see you at Laracon in a couple days, and then Ping Me will be releasing before that. Michael's going to have a talk. Michael, hit us with the date and time of your talk.
I will be speaking on the 25th of August, so the day before Laracon US. I have recorded and shipped my talk because I ain't getting up at 4 a.m. and risking waking my child and aggravating my 34-week pregnant wife. So yeah, there will be an announcement for the release of Then Ping Me in that presentation. So definitely check it out. I would love to hear your feedback on that talk on scheduled tasks. So it's something that I've been very deep in for quite some time now. So I have some knowledge to share. Also, thank you to our show sponsors. Use fathom.com/north. Check out Fathom Analytics for a 14-day free trial and $20 credit for your first month and a half. They do privacy-focused analytics, giving you all the stuff you need and none of the stuff you don't. And also thanks to Joe Lennon and the team at WorkVivo, who have renewed their sponsorship. So we'll talk more about them next episode. You can check them out at workvivo.com. We'll speak to you all in 2 weeks.
Sounds good. See ya.